Hi everyone, Melanie Muenchinger here, illustrator for Gina K Designs. Today I have a new project for you with one of my past sets from Gina K Designs, Buds and Vases, and I was kind of horrified when I was looking through my playlist today to find out that I only have one video for this set coloring the vase, and it's not even in clear yet. So this was replated to clear. I know I pointed it out in a video, but I didn't realize I hadn't made any more. So you can find lots of samples with this set on my blog, but it was before I started doing videos, so I'm going to make sure with this one and a lot of my other sets that we sell that have been very popular that I do build up playlists for them. So help me in the comments if there is something. Just remind me. I've got so many different sets to work with. But today what I want to show you, and we're going to be doing this with the pot, but watch till the end so I can show you how you can do the same technique with the jar. What is so popular right now is the no-line coloring ink technique with the antique linen or another light pad and then doing watercoloring. I really like to depend on having those lines though. It's really nice for being able to fill in, but then as I put the color on, it's really hard for me to see those lighter lines. I just have to be honest, I'm going to be 45 in a couple weeks. My vision is not as good as it was 10 years ago when I started illustrating. So what I really like to do is what I call a faux no-line technique. And this is really nice for a number of reasons. First of all, you don't need to have watercolor paper. I do have some, but I'm just going to be using regular printer paper for this or copy paper. You'll see that all you have to do is stamp it out in your black, so you have those nice defined lines that you can see the entire time you're coloring. Then you'll be able to flip it over and you're not going to see those lines. It's going to create the impression of a watercolor, but it's going to be a lot more impressionistic and it's going to look like you did it on your own. And then once this is adhered to your paper, you're not going to know that this isn't just a layering weight piece of cardstock. So the products are very minimal for this card. We're just going to be using the Memento Tuxedo Black ink pad. I've got one acrylic block that I'm going to be using for all of these images. And you'll notice I've got some impatiens here, or they could be pansies or periwinkles, and then I've got some roses. You have some stems, and all of these containers, they work really well with the different flowers in my Stately Flowers line. A little bit of adhesive, the cardstock that I'm using today. I've got some of the Bubblegum Pink, and this is 4 1/4 inches by 11 inches scored at 5 1/2. And then I've got a Cranberry Tart mat here, which is 3 7/8 by 5 1/8. And finally, I've cut my piece of paper down to 3 3/8 by 4 5/8. Then I'm going to be using my Copic markers today. One reason for that is we don't carry the Spectrum Noir markers in the Gina K store anymore, so I will still go back and forth. I have missed using these a lot though, and one reason I got away from them, in addition to the Spectrum Noir markers being added to our store, a lot of the colors that I used a lot of the time were starting to run out. And so instead of re-inking, Spectrum Noir was a great option for me. But now that I've been using Spectrum Noir for about 4 years, I think it is, a lot of my greens and other colors that I like to use for flowers, those are running low a little bit. And they just don't have quite the number of colors in their line as Copics do. So I just grabbed these that I still have in my stash. I've got 3 colors for my flower, 2 for my leaves, 2 for the pot, a blender, and then a shadow. So we've also got a white gel pen here for the accents, but for the flower, I've got the RV63, RV69, and RV55. For the pot, we're going to be using E97 and E07. And then for the leaves, I've got G12 and YG93. And then for this shadow, I have E71. Now, I knew I liked these pop colors for terracotta because I've used those before, but these other colors I just happen to have in the closest container of Copics next to my desk. So that worked out really well. Maybe I did another flower card the last time that I used these. Okay, the other reason that I like about these, the brush tip that they have, when you do flicking strokes, and you might have seen it in Gina's video recently, I've also done them in my videos, but it blends out a lot easier, so you're not going to see quite as defined of a line. That's going to work really well for this technique that we're going to be doing after we flip it. All right, so let's begin by stamping this out. And one thing I love about this, since you don't see the lines, you don't even have to mask here. So I'm going to take the pot and I'm going to take this large cluster of flowers And then you see I have an individual flower for each of these. That's going to allow you to make backgrounds or customize so that you can really flesh this out to be as big or in whatever kind of layout that you want. So I'm going to take this single one as well. So I'm going to start by stamping out the flowers, or you can start with the pot if you want to have a greeting at the bottom of that. You might want to trim this down later if you end up wanting to have a larger layout. This is just what I chose. All right, so I'm going to have one right about here, and then I'm going to add my pot. And again, if you're not going to be flipping this over, you would want to just have a mask cut out of the flowers and then add the pot over that, and then you wouldn't see that rim. But again, it's not going to make any difference for this technique since I'm turning it over. So it's going to go right over it. Okay. And then I'm going to add just a few more flowers here. So just stop whenever you think it looks good. So I just kind of want to have it a little more balanced. So I'm going to have one over here and do one up here. Try to turn it so it doesn't just look like the same flower peeking out. And one right there. Okay. And where you put these flowers, that's going to change up where your shadow is going to fall. But I always I'm going to go really loose on my shadow and suggest that when I'm coloring. Okay. So, and keep in mind it's going to be flipped over, so when you do that shadow, it's going to go off to the other side. So this is going to show us where we're going here. Okay. So I'm going to begin by let's do the flowers first. So I'm just going to fill these in, and you see I'm not even really worrying about going up to the edge of the petal. You can, but remember you're really not going to see that edge. So no one's going to know if you go outside the lines a little bit or don't meet that line. And you're going to be going in with a darker shade, so that can be when you really make sure you're getting up to the edge. And I'm doing this very quickly at first, but the more times that you cover over it, the more layers, the darker it's going to be on the other side. And what's nice about this is you can also flip it over as you go to keep checking it to see if you want to add more in certain areas. Okay. Now we're going to do that second pink. And so I'm going to be just tracing under where and over where those petals are overlapping, so the petals are more defined, so it doesn't look like just a big pink blob. So you're separating each of them out that way, and then also underneath where those leaves are overlapping and casting some shadows. This is so fun to do, and then you don't have to worry about a cup of water, you don't need a water brush, and you don't have to have any watercolor paper, or if you have some, you don't have to get it out or cut it up. So copy paper is about as cheap as it gets. All right, and then we're going to go in and we're just going to just brush it out just a little bit. You want to think about always how the flower is opening up so it's darker in that deepest part of the flower. And when you add those little touches of white at the end, that's where it's really going to come to life, and that's on the other side. It just stands out so nicely over these colored flowers. Okay? And then we'll do just a little bit along the bottom to define those petals and where it's kind of folding over a little bit. Okay, and now we're going to add this center part. So I'm going to fill in just all those centers, and then you're just going to be tracing just these little lines. They can either be folds in the flower or they can be stripes, just depending on what look you're going for. So there's not really any blending on these flowers unless you want to, but you don't really need it because of how it's going to look on the other side. Okay, so there's our flowers. I might do just a couple more stripes out to the edge. If one of the petals looks a little bit flatter than the other, like right there, that's what I'm going to go in and just kind of just a little bit more. You can really see if there's a petal that you've forgotten because it'll just look flat with that first base color. Okay. All right. Now let's do our leaves. So we're going to fill these in with our lightest green. And this is again the G12. And I just do like a second or third coat along where the edge of that leaf is, just to define the shape a little bit more. Okay. And then I'm going to take this YG93 and I'm going to go under here. And you can do some tip-to-tip coloring if you want. I do love that effect when we're not flipping it over. And then under this flower here, and then we'll put this along this edge too. Then I'm doing some flicking strokes so that we can get those veins in the leaves. Okay, looks good to me. All right, now let's do our pot. Okay, so I'm going to start with this E97, and I'm just going to fill in almost the entire thing, but leaving a few lines just in the middle for some light. But remember, this is terracotta, so there's not going to be a really reflective surface. You would have more of a defined highlight if it was ceramic, but it's got a really dull finish. And then you can even define that edge there. And remember, you've got your colorless blender. If you go outside the lines just a little bit like I did, you can do that on both sides, and it's just going to work like a little magic eraser. It's just pushing that color away. And it looks like the paper is see-through, but it's going to dry in a minute and it's going to look really good. Okay, now we're going to take this darker earthy color and I'm going to fill in the dirt. And I'm going to do under this rim here, all the way across. And I'm going to do under that leaf and under this leaf. Right here and here, since these are all covering the top of that pot. Okay, now let's do just a little bit on the edges. And if you want to do tip to tip here because you want it to be just a little bit more blended, you can. And so I'm always starting from the outer edge where I want it the darkest and then working towards the inside. Okay. Now let's flip that over and see how that's doing. Okay. So we want to blend this in a little bit more in here. So I'm going to go back to this marker. And remember, we're adding that second layer. It's working towards the middle. Okay, a little bit more in here. Okay, and then finally we're going to do our shadow. So remember, the shadow is going to go the opposite direction. So I'm just putting some under here And then I'm going off to this side a little bit for these flowers. And simple over here for those and that leaf. And then I'm going to take my blender and I'm just going to go to the outer edges, and that's just going to soften it a little bit. And then I'm going to go back in to do that edge nearest the pot, because that would be where the shadow is the darkest. So let's flip it and look at that. So you see, you want to make that really dark right there. So here, and you can use the chisel tip on these as well. Go back to this just so it'll blend a little better. Okay. All right. Do just a little bit more right here. Okay. Okay, now what I want to do, this is what's going to look really cool. Now that we have it flipped over, is I'm going to take my white gel pens. This is a Jelly Roll, but I also use the Ranger one. I have a lot of different white pens. So what we're going to do here is we're going to add some little white centers. And depending on what kind of flower you want it to be, you might just choose to do the one dot. But if you want to have it look like there's lots of little stamens or pistils, or the little dusty pollen in there, little anthers. Gosh, I need to review my flower terms. Okay, so we've got those. And then I'm going to go in and I'm just going to do just a few little details on the leaves. And you can also clean up if you have kind of a wonky edge and you want it to be a little bit more defined. Again, this is supposed to look like a painting, so I don't really let that bother me, but you can go right over that with your white gel pen, and that really just cleans that line up. So that's a nice bonus of using these as well. Okay, and then we're just going to adhere this to our card. So I'm going to take, you don't want to use, I wouldn't recommend the Connect glue on this just because it is so much thinner. You're going to want to use something that's going to lay flat, that's not going to make the paper buckle up with a wet glue. Okay, so we're just going to center this right onto our mat. I got a little bit of glue on there. And there we go. And if you'd like to add a greeting, you can. So here's the first one. Did a few more little white dots on this one, and then there's the second one. So every single one is going to look really different. Here I did a little bit less blending, you can see, but they both look like original watercolors. Now let me show you the jar that I mentioned. So here we have it, and I've got several greetings in this set that you can use for tags, or you can tie around the top of that jar or the vase or the pot with a little twine. That's something that I like to do. But on this jar, I really like to stamp it tone on tone. So I use the Blue Lagoon. This is the background paper that I have with that same Cranberry Tart. I just love how Gina's Pure Luxury Cranberry Tart is pulling out that deeper peony shade. And then I have the greeting stamped in the Blue Lagoon that coordinates with the cardstock. So that kind of looks like those ball jars where the wording is actually written or embossed onto that glass. And then you would just adhere that. So let me know in the comments which one is your favorite. And if you would like me to demo this jar, here you can see the back side of it. And I use the same color for my shadow and that blender pen. But the two blues that I used for coloring the glass and the water are the B21 and the BG15. Again, you can totally do this with the Spectrum Noir markers, so just find coordinating ones. You do need to use alcohol markers for this technique. I haven't found that any water-based markers that I have will really go through and do that blend so that you can actually get that look. So thank you for watching today. Please check out my Buds and Vases set. So fun to use these containers for the different flowers in my Stately Flowers line and my other sets, as well as other flowers in our Gina K catalog. Thank you for watching today. God bless.